por estar aquí con nosotros un miércoles más. Antes de dar inicio a nuestra sesión del día de hoy, daré unos pequeños avisos que pues si nos acompañan frecuentemente ya saben de qué se trata. Cualquier pregunta que ustedes tengan la pueden realizar a través del chat y al finalizar se haremos llegar a nuestra ponente del día de hoy. Asimismo, si aún no reciben la invitación semanal y les gustaría hacerlo, lo pueden solicitar al correo que aparece en pantalla. Y por último, les solicitamos su apoyo para llenar la encuesta de satisfacción que compartiremos también al finalizar la sesión, tanto con una liga por medio del chat, así como con un código QR que estaremos proyectando al finalizar la sesión. En nombre de la Escuela de Medicina y Ciencias de la Salud del Tecnológico de Monterrey, les doy la más cordial bienvenida a la sesión académica de pediatría. Mi nombre es Grecia Turrubiates, pediatra y coordinadora de este espacio. El día de hoy damos un cierre, cerramos con broche de oro nuestro bloque de la primera infancia. El día de hoy tenemos con nosotros a la doctora Lauren Girouard. Y bueno, como la sesión pasada, esto también va a ser en inglés, entonces si lo desean pueden activar los subtítulos en la barra de herramientas o también la transcripción. Cualquiera de las dos les va a servir para seguir ahí un poquito el ritmo y pues bueno. Sin más preámbulos, le cedo la palabra al doctor Manuel Pérez, a quien agradezco nuevamente. Ya como estamos en el cierre de este bloque, pues gracias a él y a todo su equipo por hacer posible este bloque que nos deja mucho aprendizaje y que bueno, pues cerraremos con broche de oro. Muchas gracias, doctor, y adelante, por favor.
Muy buenos días y gracias, Grecia, y a todo el equipo de la sesión de pediatría por permitirnos incluir temas relevantes a primera infancia y en este caso a tecnología, inteligencia artificial y dispositivos electrónicos. Entonces, sin más preámbulo, presentaré a la doctora Lauren Girouard. Si me pasan por favor ahí su resumen para presentarla. Lauren Girouard Hallam es psicóloga experimental e investigadora postdoctoral en Harvard University y tiene una segunda inscripción en la Universidad de Michigan. Su investigación se centra en cómo las niñas y los niños de 3 a 12 años piensan, aprenden e interactúan con fuentes digitales de información como los que ya conocemos, ChatGPT, Google, Internet, Alexa, etc. Y en estos distintos cotidianos, incluyendo el hogar y los entornos escolares. Trabaja bajo la mentoría de Susan Gelman, Jean Zhu, Jenny Radesky y Judith Danovich, y su interés principal es comprender cómo estas tecnologías digitales funcionan como herramientas de apoyo para el aprendizaje y el desarrollo del pensamiento crítico en nuestros infantes. Además, ha participado activamente en iniciativas de comunicación científica y formación académicas vinculadas a la psicología y a las ciencias cognitivas. Lauren, it's a real pleasure to have you here. And to close this session, this is the most important session for the School of Medicine in Pediatrics. So thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here today. I will go ahead and share my screen and get started. Okay, can someone with their video on give me a nod? Can we see my screen? Excellent.
Yeah,
all right.
do.
Great. So today I'm going to be talking about child development. In particular, I'm going to be talking about toddlers and young children with a focus on about 2 to 8-year-old children. I'll talk about infancy a little bit, but my specialty is early childhood. So I'll be focused on early children and what they think about technology. I'll be tackling this from 2 different perspectives. The first will be what children understand certain kinds of technology to be, what they think it is, what they think it can do. And the second dimension of this that I'll talk about is children's trust in technology. So when and why they choose to turn to it as opposed to turning to a human source to get answers to their questions. And the reason why I am interested in this is because, well, there's a lot of really great practical use to knowing the answers to these questions. In the United States, 98% of children ages 0 to 8 already have access to the internet. the numbers are quite similar the world over. So numbers in Mexico, in the UK, in different parts of Australia and New Zealand, and different parts of Asia like China and Japan. There's a lot of children that have access to the internet from birth or nearly birth. What that access looks like is not always the same. Some children access the internet for the first time via a cell phone, others through larger technologies like iPads and tablets or laptops. But something that is the same is that children are now using technology as a place to go for information and even companionship, whether that's talking to other kids online or using a piece of technology itself as a toy or a friend. Which then begs the question, do children think of these technologies as toys or tools or somewhere in between? And that's the first line of research that I want to talk to you about today, is young children's understanding of, in this particular case, chatbots, so things like ChatGPT or Google Gemini or any of the number of AI chatbots that are on the market now, and smart speakers. So smart speakers are often AI-enabled tools, the most popular being Amazon's Alexa, Echo Dot series, as well as Siri on your phone, right? You can voice to text with Siri, your personal assistant on your phone. So I'm going to talk about what kids think these kinds of technology are, what they think they do, or what they might be. And to talk about that, I first need to tell you about a hypothesis that we have within developmental psychology about how kids might be thinking about technology. And then I'll talk about what we've discovered to say whether or not this seems to be true. And this is called the new ontological category hypothesis, or the NOC hypothesis, which is how I'll refer to it from this point on, because NOC is a lot easier than repeating new ontological category a bunch of times. So the NOC hypothesis is the idea that children see technology not as an object. So they don't view technology the same way that they view a chair or a table or a window or even a computer that's not turned on or running. They understand that that's just an object. You can break it. You might need to charge it in order for it to function properly if it's a piece of technology like a computer tower or your headphones. But they view more social technology like robots, smart speakers, chatbots, as being distinct from those pure objects, from the chair or the table. But they're also distinct from human beings. Human beings can do things that different kinds of social technology cannot. So in other words, the NOC hypothesis is the idea that to kids, technology, social technology, will have both object-like and human-like traits. They exist somewhere in the liminal space between a pure object and a person. And I'm really curious how technologies like chatbots and smart speakers fit into the NOC hypothesis as an idea. A lot of the early NOC research looked at what kids think about humanoid robots. So robots that have a face, that can walk into a room. And they showed that kids think that these technologies, by the time they're 3 or 4, can be friendly and fun, can be a companion to play with, should be a friend or someone they might spend time with when they're lonely, should be someone that should not be harmed, and should be someone, in the case of very young children, who should maybe even be able to vote in an election. But what does that mean for the kinds of technology that children are actually seeing on a day-to-day basis? Because often they're not seeing a robot that looks like a human. The kinds of technology that they're seeing are closer to an object. A smart speaker still very much looks like a speaker. An AI chatbot at this point has to live on a device in order to function, right? We go to ChatGPT on our tablet or our phone or our computer. And so I'm curious where these kinds of technologies fall for kids. So the NOC hypothesis is one idea that we have in science about how children might think about social technology. The other idea is that social robots might be depictions of social agents. And this is the idea that young children see robots the same way that they see other kinds of toys, puppets or dolls, where they're recognizing that social robots are in fact just pure artifacts, non-living objects without human qualities at all. but they give them social qualities because they act human in a sort of play or imagination style exercise, like they might do with puppets at a puppet show. So rather than actually viewing social technology as having an ontology or way of being that falls between an object and a person, that would be the knock hypothesis, they are simply pretending that these objects have some human qualities. And there's a little bit of research to suggest that this might be true. In 2015, a study that was done by Kodama et al. Showed that even most middle schoolers describe Google, the search engine, as something that is manipulated and controlled by a group of people who get together. So the idea was they asked a bunch of kids to draw Google, what they thought Google was. And children tended to draw a group of adults sitting around a table, waiting to receive the question that came through the Google machine and then type out an answer, rather than showing something like a stack of servers in a building that are all getting ready to go through an algorithmic process and give an answer to questions. So this idea that Google is manipulated or controlled by a group of people who gets together and decides what sort of search results to display to you is sort of like having a puppet for information gathering. They really just see it as this display with human ideas underneath. And I propose that the solution to resolving these two theories could lie in treating development and experience as a combined lever for children's reasoning about technological ontology. So if we take what age they're at and how exposed they are to technology, we can understand what they actually think about it. And I suspect that it is, in fact, very young children who are using the knock hypothesis, who are saying that social technology is somewhere between an object and a person. And it's older children who start to view technology more as depiction. They understand that technology is a device, but that it can appear to have human-like qualities. So since we're talking today mostly about younger children, which I'm defining here as children under around age 7 or 8, something really developmentally special happens around age 7 or 8, where kids get a lot more sophisticated in the ways that they understand technology. I'm happy to answer questions about that if we'd like later, but today I'll be focusing on what very young children seem to think about technology, very young again being that under 7 age group. And a colleague of mine, Teresa Flanagan, who's currently a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Michigan, has this lovely study from 2023 where she asked a group of children what they thought about Roomba, Alexa, and a person. And what she found was that kids thought that the Roomba, the vacuum that can be on your floor and can move around in the space, operates like a pet. And they would treat it like a pet. They said they were more likely to need to care for a Roomba than for an Alexa. They thought that a Roomba might be trying to eat, where Alexa wasn't associated with those kinds of biological processes, because a Roomba has freedom of movement. It's a kind of social contingency that makes it seem like something that kids have seen that is alive out in the world around them. And that's the association that they're making, that a Roomba is like a cat or a dog. Here we see a very fundamental dimension of the knock hypothesis at work, where they're not treating this piece of social technology purely as an object, but instead of treating it like a person, they're actually treating it as something closer to an animal. Where we start to see personhood come into the picture is with devices like smart speakers, like Alexa, because Alexa's social contingency, the thing that makes it more like a human, is its ability to have a conversation. And for kids, there being a name, there being the ability to ask a question and get an answer in real time, and Alexa's ability to tell stories or sing songs, and Alexa's ability to remember a child's favorite color. These are the extremely salient social and emotional cues that children are using to say, yes, I think that Alexa is like my friend. It's not like a pet. I don't have to care for it. It, in fact, is something that has a special social relationship with me. And so I wanted to know what children think a smart speaker is, because I think smart speakers like Alexa are a great example of semi-socially contingent devices. And my past work has shown that 4 to 7-year-old children are more likely to say that psychological traits like interests and desires are within a smart speaker. This was the smart speaker that we used. Sometimes kids got to interact directly with it and then answer questions about what they thought it was. We called it Anu, after, I believe, the Gaelic goddess of knowledge, and this is what it looks like. So those young kids are saying, you know, I think that this device that you can see right now, I think that it has interest, intent, and desire. I think it can mean to do something. It can do things on purpose. I think it can want to learn about science. It was also kids under 7 who thought that these sorts of devices could have social traits, like secret keeping or relationship sharing, and moral autonomy, like the ability to be free from physical harm or ownership, or even the ability to vote. And the reason why kids are so willing to ascribe these things really isn't that far away from what we can already sort of see and assume with our own eyes. One of the reasons that kids think these devices are so kid friendly is because there are in fact versions made for kids that look like an imaginary friend come to life. When we make a piece of technology more accessible for children, we also have to understand that children are then going to imagine, invent, and create worlds around those things we've made accessible, which isn't me trying to say that we shouldn't make technology accessible for children, but we should understand what the consequences of doing so are. One of those consequences is that kids will think that these sorts of devices can think. Why wouldn't they be able to? After all, they answer our questions so intuitively. They may see these devices that are often in their bedrooms at night with them as a form of a social companion. If something can read them a bedtime story or sing them a song or tell them a joke, it's not a far leap for young children to think that they're having an authentic social relationship with this device. We call these parasocial relationships because they're actually unidirectional, and they're very normal for young children. We can think about parasocial relationships with things like imaginary friends or celebrities on YouTube or on TV shows that kids get really close to and attached to that often fade with time as they get older or evolve into other sorts of parasocial relationships. So tween boys and girls will often have crushes on celebrities that they see on TV. These are all very normal behaviors, but that are examples of these one-sided social behaviors. The idea that technology could have moral autonomy comes from the fact that young kids are often the ones who butt up against or come up against situations where technology cannot fully answer their question, where they're told, I don't know, or I can't access that information right now. So by the time a child forms what we call theory of mind, the ability to think about others, which greatly improves as children go between 3 and 5 years of age, as they start to understand that there might be an internal world to this device that they cannot fully access, the idea that it should be autonomous isn't that far of a leap. What I think is really interesting about all of this, though, is that it is in fact older children who say that smart speakers are good pedagogical agents, that they want to learn from a smart speaker and believe that it can teach. So this is children now over 7 who aren't seeing the same entertainment purposes. They're seeing technology as more informational, which goes to that social depiction idea where all of that social trapping is something that they understand as just being decoration on the outside, with the informational capacity underneath being what's really important. So very young children have that entertainment and social mindset, where older children are more interested in how technology might be used as something like a classroom tool. So what about AI chatbots? We've looked at very similar sorts of questions with AI. We recently completed a study with over 200 children where we were interested in what they think about AI chatbots like ChatGPT, Claude, Google Gemini, etc. Preliminary results suggested that children in this sample were already meaningfully familiar with AI by the time they were 5 years of age, but their views were not uniformly enthusiastic. Most children reported some exposure to AI, especially through using it to look up answers or having fun generating pictures, asking questions, or as we saw with smart speakers, something that's very popular is asking it to tell a joke, or in the case of AI chatbots, to intentionally be wrong, doing things like asking how many R's are in the word strawberry, just to be delighted when AI says 2 or 4 instead of the correct answer of 3. Children also reported, as particularly 5, 6, and 7-year-old children, as mostly seeing AI through adults using AI together with them, such as saying, oh, I don't know the answer to that question. Why don't we look it up together using a chatbot? This suggests that AI chatbots are becoming a part of children's everyday information environment, not only through solo exploratory use as they get older, but through co-viewing use like the kind that we see with the internet and tablets and smart speakers before them. So it's not something that they're encountering indirectly, but rather often directly through adults, through media, and through their own exploration. Children generally saw AI as useful for finding information. They were especially likely to endorse AI as being really helpful for answering questions about current events or things that happened in the past. By the time a child is 5, they recognize that social technology is really good at answering questions that they have. And part of the reason why that happens is because from a time that the child forms verbal language and is able to put 2 or 3 words together into questions, which happens when a child is between 18 months and 3 years of age, depending on the child. They're asking everyone and everything questions. Most parents can tell you about the time that their 3 or 4 or 5-year-old was obsessed with 2 words. The first is usually no. Everything is no. But the second is often a question, and it's why. They'll ask why to everything. Anytime a parent says we can't do this, or we're going here, or this is called this, the response from a child is often why. So it should not be a surprise that if they do this with human informants, they're also really curious and excited to do this with pieces of social technology. We know this with smart speakers, where young children ask questions from are unicorns real to what is my name to why are blueberries so tart in the spring? And they do the same thing with AI chatbots. They think they're really helpful for that factual information or for answering questions in general. At the same time, they showed more awareness in this study of AI's limitations than they think about smart speaker limitations. So many children agreed that AI can make things up, while fewer believed that most information on AI is wrong, which suggests that children are developing a nuanced view where AI is useful, but not perfectly reliable. It can make things up, but it's probably not wrong that often. This is a surprisingly sophisticated view, but we see other examples of this within selective trust, which I'll talk about a little bit later, where kids can be both extremely naive and extremely mature in their processing at the same time. We call that the dual process of selective trust. Children's social views on AI were more mixed. Part of believing that AI could make mistakes seemed to be that while they were relatively open to asking AI for advice, they were less convinced that AI could provide emotionally meaningful or accurate support, keep secrets, or serve as a friend. This is another place where we see some divergence from things like smart speakers. Now, smart speakers have been around a lot longer than AI chatbots have. And it's quite possible that as AI chatbots become more and more child-friendly, because remember, we have smart speakers that look like dragons and pandas and tigers. Right now, AI chatbots still look like something designed for adults because, well, they were designed for adults. But as an influx of technologies that are aimed at infants, toddlers, and young children come onto the market, I think we'll see that social contingency, that idea that AI can be their friend, as something that will go up. But for right now, children may see AI as a practical helper more than as a true social companion. Children also attributed some agency-like qualities to AI, so the idea that AI could do things on its own. But these beliefs varied by the type of mental capacity children thought AI might have. So children thought that AI could know the difference between good and bad and act purposefully, very similar to what we saw with smart speakers, where they assign like agency and goals and interests. But relatively few believed that AI had feelings, which was sort of exciting and interesting to see because young children, children under 6, think that smart speakers have feelings. So here is another place where AI hasn't really caught up to being social for children in the same way that some of these earlier kinds of technology are. And again, I am not here to suggest whether or not we should make AI social for children. I'll talk very briefly about them necessarily understand that it's something that can be their friend. And the reason why there's all of this concern about young children and having social lives that involve AI is because, well, it seems like there's slippery slopes with adults, where adults are getting into using AI chatbots as companions, so boyfriends or sexual partners, that 1 in 5 high schoolers, so talking now about roughly 14 to 18-year-olds, has either had a romantic interaction with AI or knows someone who has. I like us to keep in mind that that 20% number seems really big, but the vast majority were saying that they had heard of someone else who had, which I think we have to treat with a grain of salt because the teenage rumor mill is the most intense part of being a teenager. So I'm not so sure I buy this 20% number, but I do also think that it's happening. And we know that young kids think of smart speakers as friends that they can share secrets with. So that kind of intimacy is something that if they grow into it, could grow to be more common. And we know that nearly 3 in 4 teens have used AI for a social purpose in the United States. We've done some research with about 2,000 teenagers in Mexico that suggested that about a third of them had used AI for a companion purpose of some sort, with more, around half, saying that they had used it for educational or informational purposes, which matches about what my understanding of kids want to use these technologies is. It is largely centered on those informational capacities. But because we know this about adolescents and adults, we worry about what it means if AI starts as a social companion from the beginning, and then that never goes away. Something that I talked about early on is that young children tend to treat social technology like smart speakers as companions or entertainment buddies, where older children start to emphasize those informational capacities. And a lot of that has to do with older children seeing technology as more useful as information than as a friend or a toy. But since we know that that same age group is tending to view AI not only as informational, but as social as well, there are then new risks with introducing things like AI-powered children's toys. The idea that these toys are safe is a very nuanced and complex question, because the most important thing for infants, young toddlers, and early children remains interaction directly with the people around them. That isn't to say that technology and toys and fun and play aren't all critical to their development and can't involve objects. They can. But we know that these AI toys, we don't currently have the developmental psychology research to say that they are neutral or even beneficial. In fact, a lot of AI-powered toy makers have had to temporarily withdraw their products or go back to beta testing because there have been concerns about the AI feedback being unable to sort out what is appropriate or inappropriate for young children to interact with. The vocal technology on these devices is also not up to snuff, where they're often interrupting children and making children more frustrated. This is something that we see with smart speakers as well. That's one of the big drivers of kids not really trusting technology, is that they in fact think that it can't really answer their questions or doesn't understand them, because these kinds of technology aren't made for child speak. And at the end of the day, the takeaway here is that social technologies like chatbots are not people. Designed and dangers of human-like AI systems are very, very real, and many in AI research are worried about the downstream impact of AI anthropomorphism, intentionally making AI more human-like and more childlike. Because that anthropomorphization of technology is something that kids already do all on their own. They're incredibly imaginative and creative with technology that's a lot less slick and human-like than conversational generative AI. So when we're thinking about the very real applied impacts on things like design, starting with children's trust is important. So let's talk a little bit about children's trust in these devices. So we know what children trust in human informants, what they're looking for when they want the answer to a question. So let's say that a child comes into the doctor's office. They understand sort of inherently that you are probably someone who is extremely knowledgeable, that you are experienced in your particular field. You might give off an air of confidence. And of course, I have no doubt you all treat them with kindness and respect. And it's these kinds of qualities that children are looking for when they're looking for who they want to answer their questions. In fact, doctors rate extremely highly on children's list of trusted adults, with them believing information from doctors over lay adults and over pieces of technology that we tend to see children treat as better than a lot of other human sources, including their teachers. So doctors really high up there on the rating because they have all of these great qualities that kids are looking for in interactions. But technology can have some of these qualities too. As we've seen in my previous part of this presentation, social technology can seem confident, experienced, knowledgeable, and kind. So we know that by age 7, kids consistently trust Google search engines, the internet at large, smart speakers, and yes, they think that chatbots like ChatGPT are quite trustworthy, that they can give correct answers to questions. And I like to call this the inverted U of children's trust in technology because how they trust technology changes with age. Our 4 to 5-year-old kids are naive and skeptical. They think that technology can provide a lot of answers to questions, that it can know basically everything, and that it can be nearly limitless entertainment. But they still like to ask humans questions at rates above technology because that's who they're interacting with first in the world. For right now, they still see a parent, their older siblings, their teachers, their daycare workers, their pediatrician as that primary source of information first. Technology for a long time depended on a child's ability to read and write. And even once a child could ask a question directly using their voice, they still had to be able to form an appropriate question for the technology to answer. If you've ever heard early child speech, you know that that can actually be quite difficult for children to do because those early questions may not be something that a smart speaker or an AI chatbot can turn into an intelligible question to then answer in the same way that a parent understands what their child is actually asking for before they're able to form sophisticated words or sentences. So that makes our 4 to 5-year-olds naive, but also skeptical. They tend to want to still talk to people. 7 to 9-year-olds are very exploratory. They're often learning to read and write. Their search queries are much more sophisticated. They're able to ask mature questions, and they're extremely trusting of technology. This is without the scaffolding in the younger years telling them that they should really trust technology, because that's relatively new with the advent of generative AI. So that means that if we introduce that trust even younger, we can expect this trust to, at this age, to skyrocket. 7 to 9-year-olds think that technology is basically the end all be all because it is this new exciting informational tool with lots of really cool uses. And a lot of the questions they're going to be asking are relatively simple questions that they can get easy answers to. But by the time they hit 10 to 11 years old, they start to actually look a little more like younger kids. And certainly by the time they're 12 to 14. From 10 to 14, kids are able to be sort of intuitive and flexible about when it's best to turn to a person versus a piece of technology. So what happens at 4 to 5 is really important because it actually sort of mirrors what kids will do as they enter late childhood and early adolescence. And I wanted to know about this particularly in the medical domain. So I asked kids directly. We asked 288 7 to 14-year-old children whether they would rather talk to a doctor or a chatbot for answers to health questions. And the reason why I did this is because as of 2024, and I'm betting this number is a lot higher now, over a third of adults in America were already using AI chatbots to get advice on medical information, symptoms, whether or not they should go to the doctor, and what sort of treatment they should talk to the doctor for. And they were finding that they thought these AI chatbots were generally as knowledgeable or should be taken into consideration in the same way, sometimes even fighting the doctor on what course of treatment they wanted. And that they were saying they thought that the chatbots listened to them more, had more time for them, genuinely cared about what they had to say. So I was curious what kids would say. And kids don't do the same thing. When presented with an AI chatbot as an option for getting information about their own health, kids choose the doctor in 98% of trials, choosing the chatbot in only 2% of trials. When we asked them about a generally knowledgeable adult who was not a doctor, 60% said they would rather talk to the generally knowledgeable adult, with 40% saying that they would prefer the chatbot. So that's still significant preference for the human. And this was even though they said that they thought the chatbot could answer questions correctly as often as a doctor could. So it's not about the knowledge base for kids, even older kids. They are still using those social qualities, and they're finding that chatbots fall short of their medical professional. When we asked them why they held these opinions, kids often talked about the fact that doctors could see them, hear them, would have experience with kids like them, could be in the room with them. And one child who was 11, I thought put this particularly well, where she sat for a moment and then said, you know, we've been talking about health and our health and what it means to be healthy since long before the first computer came out. And if it worked to just talk to people and be healthy then, I don't see why that wouldn't be the case now. So it's something that developmental psychology is really focused on and hopeful about is the idea that these kinds of technology can be used together with a human to bolster kids' trust and the doctor's ability to make decisions and diagnose or get a really fine line in a surgery. Like, it's not that AI isn't useful, it's that kids still want to see a human first. And this is something that we see with adolescents as well, that young interaction with technology makes kids quite skeptical in navigating trust in online content as they become teenagers. So when they do see something like sensitive information or medical information, they're not quite sure whether or not it's true. They identify that there's a lot of misinformation in online sources and that AI chatbots are capable of being trained on that information. Kids recognize that AI can be false. In fact, it's become a slang term, at least here in the United States, something that we see kids doing anytime they believe something isn't real. So let's say they hear a rumor that Johnny kissed Susie on the playground. They'll say that's AI to mean they don't think that that actually happened. So they're taking a real life context and applying what they see as this sort of faulty technology. And so I think it's really important that with young children, if we're using technology in the patient room, right, in the classroom, at home, that we're talking about what it is useful for and how adults are using it to do good things, and why it might not be something that kids need to interact with directly, or that when they do, what they can, because they will, what they can expect it to be good at, and where they can expect to still want a human. So in wrapping all of this up, I really hope that my message here is that AI is incredibly useful and exciting. It has huge information capacity, and I believe it has the ability to be a great tool, particularly for adolescents and adults. But when it comes to young children, they're still directly asking for that human experience and companionship. In the words of Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park, which happens to be a favorite of mine, life finds a way. AI moves fast, but the world at large is always changing quickly for kids. And a snapshot of a cohort can be incredibly useful for understanding, okay, right now in 2025, 2026, kids still want humans as their primary source of information. Just because that might change down the line doesn't mean that understanding that now doesn't matter. And ultimately, my work is about how children develop trust and make decisions and think critically, regardless of what version of chatbot or generation of smart speaker they're using. And I want to leave you with Dana Susskind's, who's a wonderful researcher, HOPE framework, which is the idea that AI can exist in the world with us, that these smart technologies are important, but that human connection is irreplaceable, that it's important for us to own our imperfections so that we can talk with kids about how we recognize when AI makes mistakes, why we might think something is true, but then be able to change our mind, and how we make sure that we're literate, that we understand how to find a good source and look for appropriate sources of information. Because it's easy for us as human beings, imperfect human beings, to look at something that is biased or wrong and take it at face value because it seems right, or it seems like something that's in line with our own beliefs. So owning our imperfections is really important. The idea that we need to protect the early years. So again, there is no developmental research at this point to support that direct interaction with smart technologies like artificial intelligence is useful for children under the age of 4. By the time a child enters preschool, there is reason to think that early interactions with the informational capacities of AI, so its ability to answer a question, very similar to this same age group getting exposure to the early idea of what it means to search for something online, has value. So that when kids go to school and are asked to use these tools for the first time, they understand what it is and what it can and can't do. And some of that really high social, oh, I think it's my friend, I want to spend time with it when I'm lonely, can be mitigated by understanding that it's mostly for factual and informational purposes. And then the E in HOPE is enhance, not replace. And this is the idea that AI can enhance decisions that are made by policymakers, practitioners, and educators, but it can't replace what they do on a day-to-day basis. We need to think critically about how and who we support. Parents are overwhelmed, busy, and worried. Telling them that they should be scared or that they should keep these kinds of technology from their kids 100%, that it's dangerous and they should have access. Anytime we use the word never, I get a little fired up because parents are having to do so much to take care of their children on a day-to-day basis. I like to think of kids as an empty pie tin, but instead of wanting one kind of pie to be in that tin, we want to fill it with as many slices as possible. So we want a slice of cherry pie and blueberry pie and chocolate pie. And it's okay if one of those slices of pie is screen time, is technology, as long as another slice is having dinner with their family, as long as another slice is playing outside, as long as another slice is going to school and finishing their homework, as long as another slice is talking to their parents before bed at the end of the day. It's giving parents the tools and agency to say, it is okay to interact with the world as it is, and it is highly digital, because we support and understand that there's a lot going on. And educators similarly are sorting through a lot of information, as are medical practitioners and policymakers. So patience and time are important, but it's also important to know that AI moves fast. And when children are asked what they want from the future of AI, kids as young as 6, 7, and 8 actually have a lot of ideas about the roles that they want AI to play in their education and their day-to-day lives. In an in-person summit in February of 2025, 150 children and their families were gathered by the Alan Turing Institute together with Lego and Elevate Great. And they were asked, what do you want from AI? And what they said is that they want world leaders to listen to children, to think about their experiences and needs and put things into place to make sure AI is safe for children. Note that they say make sure AI is safe, not remove it from them, not restrict it from them. They wanted to see new laws that made sure that AI was developed and used ethically, not that it wasn't used at all. So did things like addressed in environmental impacts, taught them about AI in the classroom, including providing guidance and advice so that kids at different ages can understand better what AI is and how it works and when it's useful, and how they can use it safely and appropriately at different ages. They wanted to see companies being required to be open and honest about the ways that they use AI or how AI is useful for tools in certain environments, including when AI is used in their doctor's office, their classroom, and their home. They wanted there to be safety and privacy and understanding where their information, their data is stored, and whether or not the AI was sharing that with the people who made it. So they want to know whether something essentially is closed loop, so stays between an AI product, a child, and say their doctor, or open loop, where it's the child, their doctor, the AI product, but then some of that information is also going back to the AI company. They want to understand when and why that's happening. When their data is being used to train better models, they want to be able to opt in or out of that. They want to make sure AI systems are safe against hackers and criminals, and that children have the opportunity, all children have the opportunity to benefit from AI. So again, they don't want it removed. They don't want it gone. They don't want to not know about it. And we need to listen to them because their top concern about AI was that children are hardly ever asked what they think, and adults don't take their views seriously. They say that needs to change. And I believe that it is the job of researchers, policymakers, practitioners, product designers, and educators and their families to help change it for them. Thank you very much for giving me a little bit of time today. I have a lot of funding sources to thank: the National Science Foundation, the National Institute for Health, the Association for Psychological Science, Society Research, Child Development, and all of my institutions, both my graduate school at University of Louisville, as well as Harvard and the University of Michigan, and my wonderful collaborators that I've worked with on this really exciting body of research. And I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Lauren. This is a wonderful presentation. Opens our minds and on our field to many questions and many reflections for helping families in our practice, in our pediatric practices. We have many questions, many questions, but we're going to try to join some of them to ask you most of them. I'm going to start with, is there any evidence that using technology such as smart speakers or AI chatbots for learning purposes, such as answering questions, affects the way children analyze and process information?
Yeah, so there's some early mixed findings on this. And this is often something that we say when we're investigating something relatively new is, oh, findings are mixed. And I know I appreciate the frustration that can cause because research often moves much more slowly and methodically and is much less certain than the public may want us to be. But I want to be honest about where the picture is now. So there is some research to suggest that when used in limited scaffolding ways for learning, AI can actually help middle childhood, so 8, 9, 10 to early adolescent, be creative, problem solve, brainstorm, and then go out and do something independently. But there is also research to suggest that more than limited use, more than very carefully scaffolded educational interactions or at-home time with a parent, thinking about the pros and cons of the information provided, when it might be right, when it might be wrong, when those scaffolds go away, when kids are just able to use it as often as they'd like, in whatever way they'd like, that it can in fact stymie or reduce those same things: productivity, creativity, problem solving. A wonderful colleague of mine, Rachel Flynn at San Francisco State University, likes to talk about this as a problem of cognitive offloading. And it's the idea that sometimes removing some of our mental load can be really helpful. And I feel like as adults, we can see this anecdotally in our world, right? There are times where being able to put something, say, on a calendar. So, I've had in my calendar for over a month now that I'm doing this talk, that I need to be ready to go at 9:30 a.m. my time, and that I can expect to be done by 11 a.m. my time. And that means that I don't have to rehearse it in my head, right? I have that talk coming up, right? I have that talk coming up. It just gets to live in my calendar. excellent cognitive offloading, lets me do exactly what I want to do. AI can, in fact, do the same for kids, but it also can be a really slippery slope. So if I'm always relying on my calendar to remember my events for me, but I'm not checking it or looking at it or setting alarms for myself, I may then start to forget things that I've put over there. And the same is true with adults who use Google. They often treat Google search as a repository. So they say, I don't need to remember that information. I can just Google it again later. And kids are want to do that same thing with AI chatbots. It'll just know the information for me. It'll put together an outline that's better than I ever could. And that sort of reliance on AI is where we get worried about it's now too much cognitive offloading. It's now preventing. I had a teen who'd come into the lab tell me, I'm a creative writer and I can't look at a blank page with comfort anymore. There has to be something on the page. I need AI to put something there. This is obviously an N of one. Not every teen that I've interacted with is like this, but that's where we see cognitive offloading as really a lever. AI is useful when carefully structured, when thought about really, really critically, when we know that kids are using it and how. It's when they're getting hours and hours of that time, they're using it for lots of different purposes, that it becomes more of a problem. At least that's what early research suggests. This is a very popular field that we're looking at a lot of different angles of this.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to link a couple of questions here that we have. Are we designing technology for children's development, or are we asking children to adapt to technology? And if we know that children development is fundamental shaped by relationships, play, and interaction with the environment, how should we design and use this technology to strengthen, not to replace those experiences?
Yeah. So a colleague of mine, Adam Dubé, who's at McGill University, talks a lot about this. So he's in Quebec, in Montreal, in Canada. And he talks about, are we creating AI for kids that is user-friendly? So is actually scaffolded for the developmental age group that a child is at, that doesn't give them a lot of noise. So kids can have trouble paying attention to things. They get better at this with age. But when it comes to like really realizing what information is salient, important, useful, and accurate, are we creating AI devices that remove some of the having to do the work for kids? Are we creating what he calls user-friendly technology? Or are we making friendly users, which is the idea that we teach kids how to use the device as it is? And often there's a compromise to these things, right? We want technology to be intuitive for kids to use, but we also want them to get better at using the adult version with age. And if we only ever expose them to a child version of something, it can be really difficult to then apply that to the adult thing and still use that properly and smartly. And I think we see some good examples of this. If you've ever like had a kid come home, or you experienced this as a tweener teen where like math was really hard and you could do the multiple choice math questions really well, but then when you got to the word problems, you felt like you were sinking because they were so much harder and it felt like you couldn't make the connection. We want to make sure that we're bridging that connection. So when we're thinking about how we design technology for kids, one of the things that we talk a lot about is flexibility. That as kids gain mastery and skills as they get older, very similar to like playing math games or word games that get harder as kids' vocabulary get better. Like when you take a typing speed test and it like starts out slow and gets faster, that AI technologies actually need to do the same thing. That if we're going to be teaching kids how to use them, we need to have technology that moves with the development of the child. And then the second thing that we talk a lot about is off-ramping, which is that we need technology that says the game is done. The activity is done, that doesn't just repeatedly ask, what other questions do you have? Do you want me to do this next part of the task for you? Right now, AI is designed in a way that if you as an adult go and ask a question, it will then ask, do you want to know more about this? can I go ahead, if you have it, brainstorm for you? Do you want me to draft this into an outline? And then once it's an outline, do you want me to draft this into a 1-page paper? And then once it's a 1-page paper, do you want me to draft this into a 5-page paper? It will continue to ask you whether or not you want it to do the next task. It's difficult for adults to inhibit the desire to continue to ask for that next thing. It's even harder for kids to do so. So when we look at something like a kid's average screen time by the time they're 8 years old in the United States is over 3 hours a day. And a lot of that is because there's not off ramps, because there's autoplay, because there's infinite scroll where you can just keep going. The next video plays, the next image comes up. You can go forever and ever and ever on your screen. We need off ramping. And the same is going to be true with technology like AI. It needs to be designed to say, okay, great job with that brainstorming. Go talk to your teacher about what you found and get the next part of the assignment done. That doneness is going to be incredibly helpful.
Thank you. Thank you. I think you mentioned something of this in your during your presentation, but I think it's important to repeat it. What is the greatest risk and the greatest opportunity that technology presents for child development today?
Yeah. There's a lot. I consider myself a glass half full researcher. I really like to think about the power that these tools can have in children's lives as learning opportunities. And when we think about risks, I think it's really easy to form a pile on. We can think about risks to physical development with things like deteriorating eyesight related to screen time in general. We can think about risks related to social development, like having companions and toys that our AI might take away from the human relationship. But I think one risk that we don't talk a lot about because we're so focused on the interaction is what's happening with kids' idea of what privacy is. And whether or not they understand that things are private, that things are just for them, that they don't have to say yes to every piece of information about them being something that's shared with a chatbot or being something that's shared on their social media or being something that their parents can always see. As kids get older, they're supposed to gain a sense of autonomy that I really worry that with technology that is super personalized, super accessible, that doesn't necessarily say where their data is going, that kids saying yes to their lives being online, we already know is something that's getting easier and easier. We see this with things like location services where kids are just okay with their peers knowing where they are at all times, which is so wild to me because that would not have been acceptable in my generation. They're losing this idea that they get to say no to things, that they get to have things that are private, that not everything is meant to be something that improves their ad experience or that their friends all know about or that their parents know about. Teens do get to have like private crushes or, feelings about how they did on their exam that they don't have to share constantly. And when things like a chatbot's log is being shared with a company, when things like locations are demanded by parents and peers and significant others, when social media is a place where you share everything about yourself, where you journal in public, I worry that we're losing that sense of privacy. That's my big risk that I worry about. The benefit on the flip of that is that I think that these are potentially really game-changing for tinkering, for inventing, for getting kids exposed to a new kind of STEM and getting kids excited about math, computer science, and science in general in a way that we really haven't seen since the dot-com boom in the 90s when the internet becomes a big thing and everyone's experiencing with like HTML code for the first time. We brought back the tinkering era, the idea that you can make and create something and then see it be actualized in real time is a huge benefit to AI. So creating your website has never been easier. Thinking about like inventions has never been easier. Streamlining workflows has never been easier. And the idea that we can create together with AI is something that I think is really exciting, particularly when it comes to things like programming. And programming and coding are incredibly useful skills. They're two of the top skills on the general job market right now. They're useful for everything from like spreadsheet keeping careers to data analytical careers, which are extremely and exceedingly popular, to social sciences careers related to like focus groups, large surveys, et cetera. So the fact that this is huge for like the workforce, I think it's also really exciting that kids have access to coding and technology much more at their fingertips than they used to. And so that's something that I'm really hopeful and excited about, because I think a lot about young women in particular and the ways in which we tend to think code, math, computer science are really difficult, that I'm hopeful that the easy access of AI has brought back a tinkering era that sort of levels that playing field. We'll see.
We have many other questions, Lorene, and the time is almost up, but I'm going to ask you a last one because it's a very specific question. Can you comment to something about the role of AI as assistive technology in the lives of children with disabilities?
Yes, so this is actually a place where we also see a lot of hope and grace and promise. There's some really great ongoing research that looks at carers with home visits, and that AI can be incredibly assistive for having like a mediative purpose and having more open conversations with kids who might be in at-risk settings. There's some really great research on AI as an assistive technology for children with autism, where AI is performing really well as a peer tutor and what I would say is like a semi-social or limited social companion. It's the idea that it can help with learning social skills without replacing a social companion. There's some really exciting early research in that area, and I think it is an area that we should continue to fund and to give attention to and to give research resources to, because I think it is an exciting area where there is the potential for growth and help, whether that's vulnerable and at-risk kids or kids with different kinds of disabilities. Also seen some early work suggesting that it can really help with exercises that help to decrease dyslexia load for kids that have those sorts of learning disabilities. So again, new, burgeoning, we're hoping to learn more, but I do think it is potentially exciting.
Thank you very much, Lorene. We are closing the session, and wonderful presentation, wonderful thoughts, and I pass the voice to Grecia to close the session for today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lauren, and gracias, Dr. Manuel, por haber hecho este bloque posible. Gracias a todos su equipo del Centro de Primera Infancia. Thanks again, Dr. Lauren, for your time or for sharing all this information with us. Y muchas gracias a todos por haber asistido el día de hoy. Nos vemos el próximo miércoles con un nuevo bloque. Vamos a estar hablando de medicina del adolescente. Y pues bueno, buen día a todos y nos vemos la próxima semana. Thank you.